Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. This morning we are going to read chapter 39 of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. Now, let me just fix myself a little bit here. Can I make myself a little bit bigger? Normally at this time of the day, I would be reading The Great Gatsby. We're almost finished. But I think that since we have about 50 more pages, we're going to read it all together, 1.5 chapters, and that would take a long time. I don't have a lot of time this morning. So I'm reading chapter 39 of David Copperfield, which I normally read at night. So I'm mixing things up a little bit. If you have not watched one of these videos before, we are not just going to read through the words. We stop and we talk about interesting vocabulary words, interesting phrases, things that if you're learning English, if English is not your first language, we talk about vocabulary that even if you're advanced, you probably don't know, but words that might be useful to you in your daily life. And we're doing this live, so if you're watching this live with me, then I would encourage you to make comments and ask questions as we go in the comments. Don't think that you're interrupting me. That's what I want you to do. That's what makes the video interesting. What does this mean? I don't understand this. Can you go back and read this? So if you don't ask questions, then I will just sometimes stop and explain words that I think could be useful for you, or phrases that I think maybe you don't understand because they're not logical. You can't just look at the words and understand what people are talking about. All right, well, so let's get started with chapter 39 of David Copperfield, which is entitled Wickfield and Heap. My aunt, beginning, I imagine, to be seriously uncomfortable by my prolonged dejection, made a pretense of being anxious that I should go to Dover to see that all was working well at the cottage, which was let, and to conclude an agreement with the same tenant for a longer term of occupation. Janet was drafted into the service of Mrs. Strong. So Janet is his aunt's servant. And who's Mrs. Strong? Mrs. Strong is Dr. I forget his name. Dr. So-and-so's. That's a very disrespectful way of calling someone if you can't remember their name. Dr. What's his name? Dr. What's his name? Dr. So-and-so. Mrs. Strong is Dr. So-and-so's wife. And so Davy's going down to Dover to check on the cottage that his aunt has rented to someone. Janet was drafted into the service of Mrs. Strong, where I saw her every day. She had been undecided on leaving Dover, whether or no to give the finishing touch to that renunciation of mankind in which she had been educated by marrying a pilot. But she decided against that venture, not so much for the sake of principle, I believe, as because she happened not to like him. Although it required an effort to leave Miss Mills, I fell rather willingly into my aunt's pretense as a means of enabling me to pass a few tranquil hours with Agnes. I consulted the good doctor relative to an absence of 3 days, and the doctor wishing me to take that relaxation. He wished me to take more, but my energy could not bear that. I made up my mind to go. As to the Commons, I had no great occasion to be particular about my duties in that quarter, to say the truth. We were getting in no very good odor among the tip-top proctors, and were rapidly sliding down to but a doubtful position. The business had been indifferent under Mr. Jorkins before Mr. Spenlow's time, and although it had been quickened by the infusion of new blood and by the display which Mr. Spenlow made, still it was not established on a sufficiently strong basis to bear without being shaken, such as a blow as the sudden loss of its active manager. The law firm where Davy is studying and working isn't doing well. It was never doing very well, but after Mr. Spenlow died, it started doing very badly, and its reputation started going. When something is okay or good, and then it starts to deteriorate, to get worse, you can say it's going downhill. The business is going downhill. That means it's going from successful and good to bad. Or down the tubes. You could say down the tubes or down the drain. The business is going down the drain. That means it's failing very quickly, going down the drain. Mr. Jorkins, notwithstanding his reputation in the firm, was an easy-going, incapable sort of man, whose reputation out of doors was not calculated to back it up. I was turned over to him now, and when I saw him take his snuff and let the business go, I regretted my aunt's £1,000 more than ever. But this was not the worst of it. There were a number of hangers-on and outsiders about the Commons who, without being proctors themselves, dabbled in common form business and got it done by real proctors who lent their names in consideration of a share in the spoil. So he's describing that there are people outside of the law firm. I'm going to call it a law firm. It's not exactly a law firm, but let's just say that. There were people outside of the law firm whose businesses depended on these lawyers. Who knows, by making, by making actions in the court or by making documents or contracts, I don't know. But there were people outside of the office who depended on the people inside the office for their business. And when he says that they would give a share of the spoils, that means if these lawyers, these official lawyers, would help them, they would get a nice payment from them, apparently. Let's see. But I don't know why that's a problem. That sounds like a good thing for him if he needs money. I guess we'll see. And there were a good many of these, too. As our house now wanted business on any terms, we joined this noble band and threw out lures to hangers-on and outsiders. Oh, so I see what the problem is. Since Mr. Spenlow died, the business is doing very badly, and the reputation is going down the tubes, going down the drain, going downhill, deteriorating. But they still need to make money, so Mr. Jorkins is providing services to these people who hang out in the street outside the office. So it's kind of like we call that scraping the bottom of the barrel when you pursue the very worst thing because it's all that's left for you. That's scraping the bottom of the barrel, and that's what's happening here. That's a bad thing. They're ruining their reputation. Marriage licenses and small probates were what we all looked for and what paid us best. And the competition for these ran very high indeed. Kidnappers and inveiglers. What's an inveigler? Oh, we have to look up that word, inveigler. Sounds bad. You inveigler. Inveigler. Entice, lure, ensnare by flattery or artful talk. So someone who tricks you by giving you compliments. Oh, that's a beautiful hat. Would you like to buy this? That's an inveigler. You inveigler. Don't try to use flattery on me, you inveigler. Kidnappers and inveiglers were planted in all avenues of the entrance to the commons, with instructions to do their utmost to cut off all persons in mourning, and all gentlemen with anything bashful in their appearance, and entice them. Enticing is like tempting. So that's kind of like if you go to a very touristy place and you're walking down the street, you always have these people in the street saying, "Here, come to our restaurant. Here, come into my shop," something like that. So I think that's the same thing, but this is for legal services. They looked for widows, women dressed all in black, or men who didn't look strong, men who looked weak, and tried to kidnap them. Kidnappers and inveiglers. So kidnappers, they just take them and say, "Come in here." Or inveiglers, "Oh, that's a beautiful suit you're wearing. Hey, why don't you come into our store and or into our office?" Which instructions were so well observed that I myself, before I was known by sight, was twice hustled into the premises of our principal opponent. So even Davy, a few times walking down the street, they got him and forced him into the competitor's office. And that word hustle, which has become a pretty common word, a pretty popular word these days, hustling is, a lot of times it's used to talk about prostitution, especially male prostitutes. Male prostitutes I don't know if they still are, but they used to be called hustlers. A hustler is someone who tries to deceive or trick you to make money. So it's a negative word, but now people say side hustle, meaning my side way of making money. But really what that means, if you think about the word hustle, is on the side, I have a full-time job, but on the side I cheat and lie to people to make money. That's what it literally means, but people use it now in a funny way. It doesn't mean that they're cheating. It's just a funny way of saying some extra way that I make money. The conflicting interest of these touting gentlemen being of a nature to irritate their feelings, personal collisions took place, and the commons was even scandalized by our principal inveigler, who had formerly been in the wine trade and afterwards in the sworn brokery line, walking about for some days with a black eye. And any of these scouts used to think nothing of politely assisting an old lady in black out of a vehicle, killing any proctor whom she inquired for, representing his employer as the lawful successor and representative of that proctor, and bearing that old lady off, sometimes greatly affected, to his employer's office. So they used to take advantage of little old ladies whose husbands have just died. That was very easy to spot because these women would be dressed all in black. And they would say, "Oh, can I help you?" And she would say, "Oh, I'm looking for the office of John Smith." And these guys would say, "John Smith, oh, he died. But I represent the person who took over his business." And they take that, they're lying, of course. They're just tricking these little old ladies into going into their office. One of our clerks, as to marriage licenses, the competition rose to such a pitch that a shy gentleman, in want of one, had nothing to do but submit himself to the first inveigler, or be fought for, and become the prey of the strongest. One of our clerks, who was an outsider, used in the height of this contest to sit on his hat, that he might be ready to rush out and swear before a surrogate any victim who was brought in. The system of inveigling continues, I believe, to this day. The last time I was in the Commons, a civil able-bodied person in a white apron pounced. To pounce. Do you know how a cat attacks something? So imagine if you've got a toy and you're moving the toy and the cat is watching the toy and suddenly the cat jumps and attacks. This is pouncing. That's what pouncing is. So it's like an attack. It's like a cat attack. It's a cat attack. Civil able-bodied person in a white apron pounced out upon me from a doorway, and whispering the words "marriage license" in my ear, was with great difficulty prevented from taking me up in his arms and lifting me into a proctor's office. From this digression, let me proceed to Dover. I found everything in a satisfactory state at the cottage, and was enabled to gratify my aunt exceedingly by reporting that the tenant inherited her feud. And wait, a feud is like a fight, a continuous fight. So if two neighbors hate each other and they're always fighting or arguing, this is a feud. Or if two groups of people hate each other and they're always fighting, you would call this a feud. It could go on for many years. Davy's aunt is obsessed with donkeys. She hates donkeys and she chases them away, and she beats the boys who bring donkeys near her home. And, well, let's read. Let's see. By reporting that the tenant had inherited her feud. So her tenant also hates donkeys and fights and argues with people who try to bring donkeys near the home, and waged incessant war against donkeys. Miriam says, "What a surprise! Happy to see it." Well, I'm happy that you're here watching today. Usually I read this book at nighttime, but I explained earlier in the beginning of the video that we're just about to finish The Great Gatsby, but it's about 50 more pages, and I think it would take a long time to read, but I just want to finish it, so I'm doing that tomorrow morning. So instead of reading The Great Gatsby this morning, I'm just reading another chapter of this extremely long book, David Copperfield, which I normally read at night. Having settled the little business I had to transact there, and slept there one night, I walked on to Canterbury early in the morning. It was now winter again, and the fresh, cold, windy day, and the sweeping downland, and the sweeping downland brightened up my hopes a little. Coming into Canterbury, I loitered. We've seen that word before. Loitering is just standing around doing nothing. So once he got to Canterbury, he just stood on a street corner and did nothing. Or, well, he says I loitered through the old streets, so that means actually he was walking. Usually loitering is just standing in one place. But I think it just means here that he was walking around doing nothing, no purpose, not really looking in shops, just walking around with no purpose. I loitered through the old streets with a sober pleasure that calmed my spirits and eased my heart. There were the old signs, the old names over the shops. Oh, Miriam says, I was thinking you could read Gone with the Wind. I haven't thought about that. Well, Gone with the Wind. That's one of my favorite movies, but I've never read the book. Maybe I should. Maybe I was going to, because I'm finishing The Great Gatsby tomorrow, I'm just going by popular books. So I was thinking Dracula, because that's one of the most popular books on audiobooks on YouTube. I thought I might do that one next. But I don't know, that's interesting suggestion. I have to think about that. Not that I want to read a pretty long book. Actually, this is... I was just looking the other day about what is Charles Dickens' longest book, because I want to read more Charles Dickens, but gosh, this is such a long book. It's 1,400 pages. And I thought, I can't keep doing this. I'll never get through them. But this is actually his longest book. The other ones are like, most of them are normal size. Okay, but I'll think about that. I never even thought about that, but that could be a really good suggestion. I might do it. I think I probably will do it. Okay, let's see. It appeared so long since I had been a schoolboy there that I wondered the place was so little changed, until I reflected how little I was changed myself. Strange to say. That quiet influence which was inseparable in my mind from Agnes seemed to pervade even the city where she dwelt, the venerable cathedral towers, the old jackdaws, the rooks. What's a jackdaw? A rook is a bird, but what's a jackdaw? It's another type of bird. So rook, well, here's a jackdaw, in case you wanted to know. And then, let's see, since we're doing, I think a rook is just like a dove or a crow. A crow, and that's a rook. Oh, I'm having technical difficulties here for a moment. Let me just get this situated. Okay. And the old jackdaws and rooks, whose airy voice made them more retired than perfect silence would have done. The battered gateways, one stuck full with statues, long thrown down and crumbled away, like the reverential pilgrims who gazed upon them. The still nooks, where the ivied growth of centuries crept over gabled ends and ruined walls, the ancient houses, the pastoral landscape of field, orchard, and garden everywhere, on everything, I felt the same serener air, the same calm, thoughtful, softening spirit. Arrived at Mr. Wickfield's house, I found, in the little lower room on the ground floor, where Uriah Heep had been of old accustomed to sit, Mr. Micawber, plying his pen with great assiduity. What does that mean? Assiduity. Assiduity, constant or close attention to what one is doing. This would not be a word that you would want to use in real life. But I don't know. I've never seen that word before. Assiduity, constant or close attention to what one is doing. He was dressed in a legal-looking suit of black and loomed burly and large in that small office. Mr. Micawber was extremely glad to see me, but a little confused, too. He would have conducted me immediately into the presence of Uriah, but I declined. "I know the house of old, you recollect," said I, "and will find my way upstairs. How do you like the law, Mr. Micawber?" "My dear Copperfield," he replied to a man of possessed... if this is your first time encountering Mr. Micawber, he's very difficult to understand. He uses extremely complicated language to say anything. He thinks it makes him look more intelligent or more interesting, but it's very annoying because it's extremely hard to understand what he's saying. So don't worry if you don't understand whatever he says, because I don't understand it either. "My dear Copperfield," he replied, "to a man possessed of the higher imaginative powers, the objection to legal studies is the amount of detail which they involve." So he's saying it's tedious it's a lot of hard work. You have to pay very close attention to details. That's what he's saying. Even in our professional correspondence, said Mr. Micawber, glancing at some letters he was writing, the mind is not at liberty to soar to any exalted form of expression. Still, it is a great pursuit. A great pursuit. So he's complaining that he's not allowed to use his very flowery language when doing legal documents or corresponding with lawyers, because they just want very clear, exact language. And that's not what he does. That's not what he does best, being clear and precise. He then told me that he had become a tenant of Uriah Heep's old house. To be a tenant, if you are renting an apartment or a house, you are a landlord. That's the name. And if you are the person who is paying the landlord, the person who's living in the house or the apartment and paying the rent every month, you are a tenant. He then told me that he had become the tenant of Uriah Heep's old house. So he's paying rent to Uriah. Well, he's living in Uriah Heep's old house and he's renting it. And that Mrs. Micawber would be delighted to receive me once more under her own roof. It is humble, said Mr. Micawber, to quote a favorite expression of my friend Heep, but it may prove the stepping stone to a more ambitious domiciliary accommodation. So he's saying it isn't fancy, it's nothing special, but it's a stepping stone. A stepping stone is one step to a higher goal. So if you want to become a computer programmer, one stepping stone would be to earn a certificate in I don't know what kind of language computer programmers need to learn, but maybe Java. I don't know. That sounds very old. Probably people don't do that anymore. But a stepping stone to becoming a programmer is getting certified in Java, let's say, even if that's not true. I don't know if that's still true. So he's saying this is not a very nice house or beautiful house or fancy house, but it's a stepping stone to a better house, probably later. I asked him whether he had a reason so far to be satisfied with his friend Heep's treatment of him. He got up to ascertain if the door were closed or shut, before he replied in a lower voice. So Davy says, Is Uriah Heep treating you well? Uriah Heep is a snake. He's a horrible, disgusting person. And so Mr. Micawber gets up and he checks around. He checks the door to see if anybody's around, and he closes the door. My dear Copperfield, a man who labors under the pressure of pecuniary embarrassments is, with generality of people, at a disadvantage. That disadvantage is not diminished when the pressure necessitates that drawing up stipendiary emoluments before those emoluments are strictly due and payable. All I can say that my friend Heep has responded to appeals to which I need not more particularly refer, in a manner calculated to redound equally to the honor of his head and his heart. So, in normal person speak, he's saying, I can't complain, I need money, and he's paying me, or he's helping me fix my financial problems, so I'm not saying anything. But I mean, obviously that means he hates it. But what can he do? What can he do? I should not have supposed him to be very free with his money either, I observed. Pardon me, said Mr. Micawber, with an air of constraint. I speak of my friend Heep, as I have experience. I'm glad you express it. Your experience is so favorable, I returned. You are very obliging, my dear Copperfield, said Micawber, as he hummed a tune. Humming is so you're very obliging as he hummed a tune. Do you see much of Mr. Wickfield? I asked, to change the subject. Not much, said Mr. Micawber, slightingly. Mr. Wickfield is, I dare say, a man of very excellent intentions, but he is, in short, he is obsolete. So Mr. Wickfield, this is really Mr. Wickfield's business, and Uriah Heep, the snake, has snaked his way into the business and sort of taken control over everything. And now Davy wants news about Mr. Wickfield. Do you see a lot of Mr. Wickfield? No. He's very nice. He's a very nice man, but he doesn't do much anymore. Uriah has taken over everything in that business. I'm afraid his partner seeks to make him so, said I. So Davy's saying, I think Uriah is doing this to him. He's taking control of the business and abusing Mr. Wickfield. My dear Copperfield, returned Mr. Micawber, after some uneasy evolutions on his stool, allow me to offer a remark. I am here in a capacity of confidence. Confidence means secrecy or trust. Here, I think it means more like trust. So, in my position, I am very trusted. I can't tell you much, is what he's saying. I am here in a position of trust. You see, that's the next line. I am here in a position of trust. The discussion of some topics, even with Mrs. Micawber herself, so long the partner of my various vicissitudes, and a woman of remarkable lucidity of intellect, is, I am led to consider, incompatible with the functions now devolving on me. I would therefore take the liberty of suggesting, in our friendly intercourse, which I trust will never be disturbed, we draw the line. So Micawber is saying, I can't tell you what I think, because my job is to keep secrets and to be trusted. I don't even tell Mrs. Micawber what's happening. And so we have to draw a line. To draw a line means there's a certain point you cannot cross. We're friends. We share secrets. We talk. But I have to draw a line. And there's some secrets I cannot share with you. Some things I cannot tell you. Drawing a line actually is a very common phrase. Drawing a line means setting a boundary or creating a limit to something. We're friends. I share secrets with you, but I can't tell you everything. I have to draw a line that I cannot pass. On this side of the line, said Mr. Micawber, representing it on the desk with an office ruler, is the whole range of his human intellect, with a trifling exception. On the other is that exception, that is to say, the affairs of Mr. Wickfield and Heep, with all belonging and appertaining thereunto. I trust I give no offence to the companion of my youth in submitting this proposition to his cooler judgment. So Mr. Micawber is saying, I hope you're not offended that I can't share these secrets with you, that I can't tell you these things. Though I saw an uneasy change in Mr. Micawber, which sat tightly on him, as if his new duties were a misfit, I felt I had no right to be offended. My telling him so appeared to relieve him, and he shook hands with me. I am charmed, Copperfield, said Mr. Micawber. Let me assure you, with Miss Wickfield. She is very superior young lady, of very remarkable attractions, graces, virtues. Upon my honour, said Mr. Micawber, indefinitely kissing his hand and bowing with the genteelest air, I do homage to Miss Wickfield. Hem. I don't know why he's saying hem. I am glad of what that, at least, said I. Oh, like. I'm glad of that, at least, said I. If you had not assured us, my dear Copperfield, on the occasion of that agreeable afternoon we had the happiness of passing with you, that D was your favourite letter, said Mr. Micawber, I should unquestionably have supposed A had been so. So he's saying, if you had not shared that secret with us that you're in love with Dora, I would imagine, actually, that you were in love with Agnes. We have all some experience of a feeling that comes over us occasionally of what we are saying and doing having been said and done before in a remote time, of our having been surrounded dim ages ago by the same faces, objects, and circumstances, of our knowing perfectly what will be said next, as if we suddenly remembered it. I never had this mysterious impression more strongly in my life than before he uttered those words. So he's having an experience of déjà vu. Have you heard that experience? That déjà vu is when you have the experience that this thing happened before. So that's a French phrase, déjà vu. That means already seen. And we use that in English for that experience where you think something has already happened before. Did you ever? I had that yesterday, I think, when I was reading The Great Gatsby. I've never read that book, but as I was reading, I wanted to say something, actually. But as I was reading that story live, I was thinking, I've read this before. I remember these words. I remember doing it on a video. I've never done that. So I had déjà vu yesterday. That's what Davy is saying. He's saying, right before he made that comment that I thought you were in love with Agnes, I had this enormous, very strong feeling of déjà vu, that this had happened before. I took my leave of Mr. Micawber for the time, charging him with my best remembrances to all at home. As I left him, resuming his stool and his pen, and rolling his head in his stock, to get it into easier writing order, I clearly perceived that there was something interposed between him and me. So there was something interposed, something in between them, something like a barrier. Since he had come into his new functions, which prevented our getting at each other as we used to do, and quite altered the character of our intercourse. So before they were very free in how they spoke to each other, and now he feels like, since he has this new job, he doesn't feel the same connection that he used to feel with Mr. Micawber. Something is interfering with their relationship and how freely they used to talk with each other. There was no one in the quaint old drawing room, though it presented tokens of Mrs. Heep's whereabouts. Tokens are symbols or representations of things. So Mrs. Heep is kind of an old woman. Probably she knits. So maybe you could see her knitting or her sewing kit in that room. There was no one in the room, but there were tokens of her presence, representations of her presence in the room. I looked into the room, still belonging to Agnes, and saw her sitting by the fire at a pretty, old-fashioned desk she had, writing. My darkening the light made her look up. What a pleasure to be the cause of that bright change in her attentive face, and the object of that sweet regard and welcome. "Ah, Agnes," I said, when we were sitting together, side by side, "I've missed you so much lately." "Indeed," she replied. "Again? And so soon?" I shook my head. "I don't know how it is, Agnes. I seem to want some faculty of mind that I ought to have. You were so much in the habit of thinking for me in the happy old days here, and I came so naturally to you for counsel and support, that I really think I have missed acquiring it. So, in simple terms, I miss you." And what is it? Said Agnes cheerfully. I don't know what to call it, I replied. I think I'm earnest and persevering. I'm sure of it, said Agnes. And patient, Agnes? I inquired with a little hesitation. Oh, yes, returned Agnes, laughing. Pretty well. And yet, said I get so miserable and worried, and am so unsteady and irresolute in my power of assuring myself. What I know I must want. Shall I call it reliance of some kind? Call it so, if you will, said Agnes. Well, I returned, see here. You come to London. I rely on you. I have an object and a course at once. I am driven out of it. I come here, and in a moment I feel an altered person. The circumstances that distressed me are not changed since I came into this room, but an influence comes over me in that short interval that alters me. Oh, how much for the better. What is it? What is your secret, Agnes? So Davy's saying, I'm so worried. I'm having such a horrible time, but when I come and see you, I feel so much better. Why? Why is that? It's the old story, said I. Don't laugh when I say it was always the same in little things as it is in greater ones. My old troubles were nonsense, and now they are serious. But whenever I have gone away from my adopted sister, Agnes looked up with such a heavenly face and gave me her hand, which I kissed. Whenever I have not had you, Agnes, to advise and approve in the beginning, I have seemed to go wild and to get into all sorts of difficulty. When I have come to you at last, as I have always done, I have come to peace and happiness. I have come home now like a tired traveler, and find such a blessed sense of rest. I felt so deeply what I said, it affected me so sincerely that my voice failed, and I covered my face with my hand and broke into tears. I write the truth. Whatever contradictions and inconsistencies there were within me, as there are within so many of us, whatever might have been so different and so much better, whatever I have done, in which I had perversely wandered away from the voice of my own heart, I knew nothing of. I only knew that I was fervently in earnest when I felt the rest and peace of having Agnes near me. So he's just saying he's so worried about all these different things, about Dora, about his aunt, about getting money. But when he goes to visit Agnes, all of that disappears, and he feels relaxed and much better. In her placid sisterly manner, with her beaming eyes, with her tender voice, and with that sweet composure which had long ago made the house that held her quite a sacred place to me, she soon won me from this weakness and led me on to tell all that had happened since our last meeting. And there is not another word to tell, Agnes, said I, when I had made an end of my confidence. Now my reliance is on you. So Davy's telling her the whole story about how he's in love with Dora. The father discovered their secret engagement, and then the father died, and now Dora has no money, and she's living with her aunts. He told her all of that story. But it must not be on me, Trotwood, returned Agnes, with a pleasant smile. It must be on someone else. On Dora, said I. Assuredly. Why, I have not mentioned, Agnes, said I, a little embarrassed, that Dora is rather difficult to, I would not for the world say to rely upon, because she's the soul of purity and truth, but rather difficult to, I hardly know how to express it, really, Agnes. She's a timid little thing, and easily disturbed and frightened. Some time ago, before her father's death, when I thought it right to mention to her, but I'll tell you, if you'll bear with me, how it was. Accordingly, I told Agnes about my declaration of poverty, about the cookery book, the housekeeping accounts, and all the rest. So, if you didn't see if you weren't watching or reading the previous chapters, Dora, whose father was extremely wealthy, had many servants, and she never had to do anything except look pretty, not even think. She just sat there looking pretty with her little dog. And Davy's saying, look, I'm poor now. If you still want to marry me, you have to think about how it's going to be living. You're going to have to do things for yourself. You're going to have to learn to cook, to clean, to manage the house while I work. And Dora's saying, oh, stop it. I can't. Yes, I'm going to marry you, but I can't do all of those things. Don't be ridiculous. She cannot understand how life will be different. I mean, Davy wants to marry her. She wants to marry him. She understands he's poor now. She's poor now. But she just hasn't lived a life where she ever had to think about those things. She can't think about those things. So she doesn't take him seriously when he's saying, no, really, you have to learn how to take care of the house. There won't be any servants. Oh, Trotwood, she remonstrated with a smile. Just your old headlong way. You might have been in earnest in striving to get on in the world without being so very sudden with a timid, loving, inexperienced girl. Poor Dora. I never heard such sweet, forbearing kindness expressed in a voice as she expressed in making this reply. It was as if I had seen her admiringly and tenderly embracing Dora and tacitly reproving me by her considerate protection. For my hot haste in fluttering is like the movement of a bird's wings or a butterfly. So your heart sometimes flutters. A fluttering, see, that's what he's saying here, a fluttering little heart. Imagine the wings of a bird moving. So his friend is saying, oh, you're so worried about how life is going to be that you're freaking her out. Because he made her cry. She even passed out. She even fainted, lost consciousness as he was telling her, no, really, we're poor now. We're going to be poor. It's going to be bad. But he's just trying to not deceive her so that she has a chance to say, no, I won't marry you. But it was too much for her, and she actually lost her consciousness. She fainted at one point. And so now his friend Agnes is saying, oh, well, you're so worried about that you're freaking her out. You're making her miserable. You can't be like that with her. That's not how that's not her character. That's not how she was raised or brought up. It was as if I had seen Dora in all her fascinating artlessness caressing Agnes and thanking her and coaxingly appealing against me and loving me with all of her childhood, with all of her childish innocence. I felt so grateful to Agnes and admired her so. I saw those two together in a bright perspective. Such well-associated friends, each adoring each other so much. And now he's imagining, oh, when we get married, Agnes and Dora will be the best of friends, obviously. What ought I to do then, Agnes? I inquired, after looking at the fire a little while. What would be right to do? I think, said Agnes, that the honorable course to take would be to write to those two ladies. Don't think that any secret course is an unworthy one. Don't you think that any secret course is an unworthy one? Yes. If you think so, said I. I am poorly qualified to judge of such matters, replied Agnes with a modest hesitation, but I certainly feel, in short, I feel that your being secret and clandestine is not being like yourself. Like myself, in the too high opinion you have of me, Agnes, I'm afraid, said I. like yourself, in the candor of your nature, she returned, and therefore I would write to those two ladies. I would relate as plainly and openly as possible all that has taken place, and I would ask their permission to visit sometimes at their house. Considering that you are young and striving for a place in life, I think it would be well to say that you would readily abide by any conditions they might impose upon you. I would entreat them. Entreating is like begging, please. I would entreat them not to dismiss your request. Dismissing is go away. Don't dismiss. I would beg them, please don't ignore my request. Without a reference to Dora, and to discuss it with her when they should think the time is suitable. I would not be too vehement, said Agnes gently, or propose too much. I would trust to my fidelity and perseverance, and to Dora. But if they were to frighten Dora again, Agnes, by speaking to her, said I, and if Dora were to cry and say nothing about me, is that likely? Inquired Agnes, with the same sweet consideration in her face. God bless her. She's as easily scared as a bird, said I. It might be. Or if the two Miss Spenlows, elderly ladies of that sort, are odd characters sometimes, should not be likely persons to address in that way. I don't think, Trotwood, returned Agnes, raising her soft eyes to mine, I would consider that perhaps it would be better only to consider whether it was right to do this, and if it is, to do it. I had no longer any doubt on the subject. With a lightened heart, though with a profound sense of the weighty importance of my task, I devoted the whole afternoon to the composition of the draft of this letter, for which great purpose Agnes relinquished her desk to me. But first I went downstairs to see Mr. Wickfield and Uriah Heep. I found Uriah in possession of a new plaster-smelling office, built out in the garden, looking extraordinarily mean in the midst of a quantity of books and papers. He received me in his usual fawning way. Fawning is when you pay a lot of attention to someone. It could be very fake. Oh, welcome, come and sit down, have some tea, it's so great to see you. This is fawning over someone. And Uriah Heep does that all the time. It's kind of annoying the way he does. It's because it seems very insincere and fake. It's too strong. He received me in his usual fawning way, and pretended not to have heard of my arrival from Mr. Micawber, a pretense I took the liberty of disbelieving. He accompanied me into Mr. Wickfield's room, which was the shadow of its former self, having been divested of a variety of conveniences for the accommodation of the new partner, and stood before the fire, warming his back, shaving his chin with his bony hand, while Mr. Wickfield and I exchanged greetings. "You stay with us, Trotwood, while you remain in Canterbury," said Mr. Wickfield, not without a glance at Uriah for his approval. "Is there room for me?" said I. "I'm sure, Master Copperfield. I should say Mr., but the other comes so natural," said Uriah. "I would turn out of your old room with pleasure, if it would be agreeable." "No, no," said Mr. Wickfield. "Why should you be inconvenienced? There's another room. "Oh, but you know," returned Uriah with a grin, "I should really be delighted." To cut the matter short, I said I would have the other room, or none at all, and so it was settled that I should have the other room, and taking my leave, which means saying goodbye, so saying goodbye to Uriah Heep and Mr. Wickfield, and taking my leave of the firm until dinner, I went upstairs. I had hoped to have no other companion than Agnes, But Mrs. Heep had asked permission to bring herself and her knitting near the fire in that room, on the pretense, they keep using this word pretense, that means excuse. So on the pretense of its having an aspect more favorable for her rheumatics, and rheumatics are arthritis. So Mrs. Heep, where does she want to go? Agnes has her own private little room. That's where she and Davy were talking earlier. And even I think Agnes even mentioned, because the Heeps had moved into the house, and Agnes hates that she hates, everybody hates the Heeps. But she said, well, at least I still have my own little private room where I can be alone. But now Mrs. Heep is saying, oh, can I just sit in here because of my arthritis? You know, this room is better, it's smaller, there's a fire, it helps with my arthritis. So of course Agnes has to let her be in that room also, on the pretense of its having an aspect more favorable for her rheumatics. As the wind then was than the drawing room or the dining parlor, though I could almost have consigned her to the mercies of the wind on the topmost pinnacle of the cathedral. Without remorse, I made a virtue of necessity and gave her a friendly salutation. So Davy's saying, I don't care about her stupid arthritis. She can suffer anywhere in the worst possible place for it. He doesn't like her. Nobody likes them. They're really horrible, sneaky people. But he couldn't be rude, so he said, sure, fine, come in here. I am humbly thankful to you, sir, said Mrs. Heep, in acknowledgment of my inquiries concerning her health. But I'm only pretty well. I haven't much to boast of. If I could see my Uriah well settled in life, I couldn't expect more, I think. How do you think my Uri looking, sir? What? Wait, how do you think my Uri looking, sir? Is she? I don't know what she's asking. I think she's asking, what do you think of Uriah? How he's doing or how he looks? I thought him looking like as villainous as ever. A villain is a bad person, an evil person, a person who does bad things. We talked about that word. Maybe it was in a different book. I can't remember anymore. But we just recently talked about that word villain. A villain is a bad person. And so when his mother says, what do you think of my son? Davy's thinking, well, he looks as evil as ever, as always, even more than normal. I thought him looking as villainous as ever, and I replied that I saw no change in him. Oh, don't you think he's changed? Said Mrs. Heep. There I must humbly beg leave to differ from you. Don't you see a thinness in him? No more than usual, I replied. Don't you, though? Said Mrs. Heep. But you don't take notice of him with a mother's eye. His mother's eye was an evil eye to the rest of the world. I thought, as it met mine, howsoever affectionate to him, and I believe she and her son were devoted to one another. It passed me and went on to Agnes. Don't you see a wasting and a wearing in him, Miss Wickfield? Inquired Mrs. Heep. Oh, no, said Agnes quietly, pursing the work on which she was engaged. You're too solicitous about him. He's very well. Mrs. Heep, with a prodigious sniff, resumed her knitting as well. What is it? We've done that word prodigious before, but I just don't see what it means here. Prodigious, remarkably or impressively great, extent, its size or degree. Prodigious. So with a sniff is, well, now I'm doing a sniff is, that's sniffing, like taking in air through your nose. A prodigious sniff would be, because it says prodigious is remarkable, impressive, great in extent, size, or degree. She never left off or left us for a moment. I had arrived early in the day, and we had still 3 or 4 hours before dinner. But she sat there, plying her knitting needles as monotonously as an hourglass might have poured out its sands. She sat on one side of the fire. I sat at the desk in front of it. A little beyond me, on the other side, sat Agnes. Whensoever, slowly pondering over my letter, I lifted up my eyes, and meeting the thoughtful face of Agnes, saw it clear, and beam encouragement. Beam means like project, so project encouragement. With its own angelic expression, I was conscious presently of the evil eye passing me and going on to her and coming back to me again and dropping furtively. Furtively means like hidden or secretly upon the knitting. What the knitting was, I don't know, not being learned in that art. But it looked like a net, and she worked away with those Chinese chopsticks of knitting needles. She showed in the firelight like an ill-looking enchantress, balked as yet by the radiant goodness opposite, but getting ready for a cast of her net by and by. So he's comparing Mrs. Heap sitting by the fire knitting looks like an evil old witch. And if you compare that to Agnes, who looks like an angel. And so far nothing is happening between them, but it looks like she's knitting a net, something to capture Agnes with or ruin her. At dinner, she maintained her watch with the same unwinking eyes. Winking is this. That's winking. So, or blinking. I think really here it means like blinking. She never blinks. So she's always looking at them. Agnes, Davy. And she never blinks. After dinner, her son took his turn, and when Mr. Wickfield himself and I were left alone together, leered at me and writhed. Writhing is the movement of a snake, the kind of S movement, writhe. That's what Uriah is always doing. He's always writhing. After dinner, her son took his turn, and when Mr. Wickfield himself and I were left alone together, leered at me, looking at me, staring at me, and writhed until I could hardly bear it. In the drawing room, there was the mother, knitting and watching again, all the time that Agnes sang and played. The mother sat at the piano. Once she asked for a particular ballad. A ballad is a type of song. Which she said her Yuri, who was yawning in a great chair, doted on. And at intervals she looked round at him and reported to Agnes that he was in raptures with the music, but she hardly ever spoke. I question if she ever did, without making some mention of him. It was evident to me that this was the duty assigned to her. So the mother is saying to Agnes, "Oh, sing this love song. My Yuri loves this love song." So Agnes would sing it. She doesn't talk. She just plays the piano and sings. And the mother is looking between them, trying to get them together. This lasted until bedtime, to have seen the mother and the son like two great bats hanging over the whole house and darkening it with their ugly forms, made me so uncomfortable that I would have remained downstairs, knitting and all, then gone to bed. I hardly got any sleep. Next day, the knitting and watching began again, and lasted all day. I had not an opportunity of speaking to Agnes for 10 minutes. I could barely show her my letter. I proposed to her to walk out with me, but Mrs. Heap repeatedly complaining that she was worse. Agnes charitably remained within to bear her company. towards the twilight, I went out by myself, musing. Musing is kind of like thinking. Musing. Musing on what I ought to do, and whether I was justified in withholding from Agnes any longer what Uriah Heep had told me in London, for that began to trouble me again very much. Uriah told Davy in London, "I want to marry Agnes." But he promised not to say anything, so he can't say anything, but he's absolutely disgusted by this, just watching him in that house, knowing his plans to marry Agnes. I had not walked out far enough to be quite clear of the town upon the Ramsgate Road, where there was a good path, when I was hailed through the dust by somebody behind me. You know, hailing is like getting someone's attention. Hey! So actually, if you go into a big city and you want a taxi, you hail a taxi. You do this, "Come over here, I need a taxi." That's hailing a taxi, hailing a cab. So someone hailed him. He's walking down the street, and someone says, "Hey, you, come over here." That's hailing someone. When I was hailed through the dust by somebody behind me, the shambling figure and the scanty great coat were not to be mistaken. I stopped, and Uriah Heep came up. "Well," said I. "How fast you walk," said he. "My legs are pretty long, but you've given 'em quite a job." "Where are you going?" said I. "I'm going with you, Master Copperfield, if you'll allow me the pleasure of a walk with an old acquaintance." Saying this with a jerk of his body, jerking, that's like a movement. He's always moving around in weird ways, which might have been either proprietary or derisive. He fell into step beside me. So that's very annoying. Davy leaves the home to escape the Heeps. He's so annoyed by them. But Uriah came after him. "Let's go for a walk together, old buddy, old pal." "Uriah," said I, as civilly as I could. To be civil means to be polite. So he's really angry and annoyed, and he's trying to be nice, but he's so tired of being around them. "Uriah," I said, as civilly as I could. After a silence, "Master Copperfield," said Uriah. "To tell you the truth, at which you will not be offended, I came out to walk alone, because I have had so much company." He looked at me sideways, and said with his hardest grin, "You mean mother." "Why, yes, I do," said I. But you know we're so very humble," he returned, "and having such a knowledge of our own humbleness, we must really take care that we're not pushed to the wall by them as isn't humble. All stratagems are fair in love, sir." Raising his great hands until they touched his chin, he rubbed them softly and chuckled. Chuckling is laugh. That's chuckling. So he softly chuckled, looking as like a malevolent baboon, I thought, as any human could. "You see," he said, still hugging himself in that unpleasant way and shaking his head at me, "you're quite a dangerous rival, Master Copperfield. You always was, you know." So Uriah wants Agnes, and he considers Davy competition to Agnes. "Do you set a watch upon Miss Wickfield, and make her home no home because of me?" said I. "Oh, Master Copperfield, those are very harsh words." Harsh. He doesn't pronounce H's at the beginning of words. Harsh means very strong, very intense, in a bad way. So the harsh sun means the sun is very strong and intense in a way that you don't like. Or, he spoke harsh words to me. He said very strong, very bad words to me. I didn't like those words. They were very strong and not nice. And so, what did he say? How did he use it here? Oh, Master Copperfield, those are very harsh words. So he's saying the thing you said is not very nice and very strong. I don't like what you said. Put my meaning into any words you like, said I. You know what it is, Uriah, as well as I do. Oh, no. You must put it into words, he said. Oh, really, I couldn't myself. Do you suppose, said I, constraining myself to be very temperate and quiet with him on account of Agnes. So he's trying so hard to be nice, but he hates Uriah Heep. And he hates that he knows this plan of his to marry Agnes. That I regard Miss Wickfield otherwise than a very dear sister. You know, Uriah earlier said, I think you're competition to me. I want to marry Agnes, and I feel like you're competition. And Davy's saying, she's like my sister. Well, Master Copperfield, he replied, you perceive I am not bound to answer that question. You may not, you know, but then you see you may. Anything to equal the low cunning of his visage, and of his shadowless eyes, without the ghost of an eyelash, I never saw. Come then, said I, for the sake of Miss Wickfield. My Agnes, he exclaimed, with a sickly, angular contour of himself. My Agnes. Uh-oh, I've gone blurry. Am I back? Okay, wait, let me just adjust this. Okay. My Agnes, he exclaimed with a sickly, angular contortion of himself. Would you be so good as call her Agnes, Master Copperfield? For the sake of Agnes Wickfield, heaven bless her. Thank you for that blessing, Master Copperfield, he interposed. I will tell you what I should, under any other circumstances, as soon as have thought of telling to Jack Ketch. To who, sir? Said Uriah, stretching out his neck and shading his ear with his hand. To the hangman, I returned, the most unlikely person I could think of. Though his own face had suggested the illusion quite as natural sequence, I am engaged to another young lady. I hope that contents you. Upon your soul, said Uriah. I was about indignantly to give my assertion the confirmation he required, when he caught hold of my hand and gave it a squeeze. Oh, Master Copperfield, he said, if you had only had the condescension to return my confidence when I poured out the fullness of my art, the night I put you so much out of the way by sleeping before your sitting-room. I never should have doubted you. As it is, I'm sure I'll take off Mother directly, and only too happy. I know you'll excuse the precautions of affection, won't you? Oh, I think I understand a little bit more what's happening. The mother is being annoying because she's afraid that Davy is going to marry Agnes or fall in love with Agnes. That's why she's always sitting around watching them all the time. And so that's why, and now Uriah is saying, well, now that I know that you're engaged, I'll tell Mother to leave her alone. What a pity, Master Copperfield, that you didn't condescend to return my confidence. I'm sure I gave you every opportunity, but you never have condescended to me as much as I could have wished. I know you have never liked me as I have liked you. All this time he was squeezing my hand with his damp, fishy fingers, while I made every effort I decently could to get it away. But I was quite unsuccessful. He drew it under the sleeve of his mulberry-colored greatcoat, and I walked on, almost upon compulsion, arm in arm with him. "Shall we return?" said Uriah, by and by, wheeling me face about towards the town, on which the early moon was now shining, silvering the distant windows. "Before we leave the subject, you ought to understand," said I, breaking a pretty long silence, "that I believe Agnes Wickfield to be far above you, as far removed from all your aspirations as the moon herself." Uh-oh. Davy's letting him have it. He's saying, "There's no way Agnes should ever marry you." "Peaceful, ain't she?" said Uriah. "Very. Now confess, Master Copperfield, that you haven't liked me quite as I have liked you. All along you've thought me too humble. Now, I shouldn't wonder." I'm not fond of professions of humility," I returned, "or professions of anything else. Profession here, probably if you know that word profession, it means like a career. Doctor, lawyer, that's a profession. But if you think about the word professor, what does that mean? A professor says things to people, declares things to people. And that's what profession means, really, is a person who says things, a person who confidently can tell you things. And that's what it means here. A profession of humbleness means, "Oh, I'm so humble." That's professing that you're humble. And Davy says, "I don't like all of these professions of humbleness that you make, because that's really the opposite of being humble. Humble is being quiet and not noticeable, and well, that's what it is." And what Uriah is always doing is saying, "I'm so humble, I'm so humble." That's not humble. That's the opposite of humble. That's a profession of humbleness. It's telling people you're humble, but not really being humble. "I'm not fond of professions of humility," I returned, "or professions of anything else." "There now," said Uriah, looking flabby and lead-colored in the moonlight. "Didn't I know it? But how little you think of the rightful humbleness of a person in my station, Master Copperfield. Father and me was both brought up at a foundation school for boys, and Mother, she was likewise brought up at public, sort of charitable establishment. They taught us all a deal of humbleness. Not much else that I know of, from morning to night. We was to be humble to this person and humble to that, and to pull off our caps here, and to make bows there, and always to know our place, and to abase ourselves before our betters. And we had such a lot of betters. Father got the Monitor Medal by being humble. So did I. Father got made a sexton by being humble. He had the character among the gentle folks of being such a well-behaved man that they were determined to bring him in. 'Be humble, Uriah,' says Father to me, 'and you'll get on.' That means you'll succeed." It wasn't what always being dinned into you and me at school. It's what goes down best. "Be humble," says Father, "and you'll do." And really, it ain't done bad. It was the first time it had ever occurred to me that this detestable cant, a cant is like a song, this disgusting song, this horrible song, this song I hate, of false humility might have originated out of the Heap family. So he's thinking for the first time, oh, it's not just something the Heaps do. It was kind of drilled into them at school. I had seen the harvest, but never thought of the seed. "When I was quite a young boy," said Uriah, "I got to know that what humbleness did, and I took it. I ate humble pie with an appetite, and I stopped at the humble point of my learning. And, says I, hold hard, when you offered to teach me Latin, I knew better. People like you to be above you, says father. People like to be above you, says father. Keep yourself down. I am very humble to the present moment, Master Copperfield, but I've got a little power. And he said all of this, and I knew as I saw his face in the moonlight that I might understand he was resolved to recompense himself by using his power. I had never doubted his meanness, his craft and malice, but I fully comprehended now, for the first time, what a base, unrelenting, and revengeful spirit must have been engendered by this early and this long suppression. So all these years Uriah has been told to be humble, to be respectful of others, to know his place, to stay low, and be very submissive to people above him. And he was, but he always resented it and he always hated it. And now he was finding some way to get power, and he wanted revenge on all of these people, and he actually wanted to be above them and do bad things to them. His account of himself was so far attended with an agreeable result that it led to his withdrawing his hand, in order that he might have another hug himself under the chin. Once apart from him, I was determined to keep apart, and we walked back side by side, saying very little more by the way. Whether his spirits were elevated by the communication I had made to him, or by his having indulged in the retrospect, I don't know. But they were raised by some influence. He talked more at dinner than was usual with him, asked his mother, off duty from the moment of our re-entering the house, so his mother had relaxed. She wasn't constantly looking between Davy and Agnes. That's what it means by off duty, not working. Whether he was not growing too old for a bachelor, and once looked at Agnes so that I would have given all I had for leave to knock him down. So Davy wanted to go over there and punch him really hard. When we three males were left alone after dinner, he got into a more adventurous state. He had taken little or no wine, and I presume it was the mere insolence of triumph that was upon him, flushed perhaps by the temptation my presence furnished to its exhibition. I had observed yesterday that he tried to entice Mr. Wickfield to drink. Mr. Wickfield likes to drink alcohol, but it seems like Uriah is pushing him to drink more. Oh, have more, have more. So he's taking advantage of Mr. Wickfield's weakness of alcohol to get power over him. That's what Davy is observing. And interpreting the look which Agnes had given me as she went out, had limited myself to one glass, and then proposed that we should follow her. I would have done so again today, but Uriah was too quick for me. "We seldom see our present visitor, sir," he said, addressing Mr. Wickfield, sitting, such a contrast to him, at the end of the table, "and I should propose to give him welcome in another glass or two of wine. If you have no objections, Mr. Copperfield, your health and happiness." So instead of offering the wine, he's sort of pushing it on them in a way that they can't refuse. I was obliged to make a show of taking the hand he stretched across to me. And then, with very different emotions, I took the hand of the broken gentleman, his partner, "Come, fellow partner," said Uriah, "if I may take the liberty now, suppose you give us something or another appropriate to Copperfield." I pass over Mr. Wickfield's proposing my aunt, his proposing Mr. Dick, his proposing Doctor's Commons, his proposing Uriah, his drinking everything twice, his consciousness of his own weakness, the ineffectual effort that he made against it, and the struggle between his shame and Uriah's deportment, and his desire to conciliate him, the manifest exultation with which Uriah twisted and turned him and held him up before me. It made me sick at heart to see, and my hand recoils in writing it. So now Davy is witnessing how badly Mr. Wickfield has fallen. "Come, fellow partner," said Uriah at last, "I'll give you another one, and humbly ask for bumpers, seeing I intend to make it the divinest of her sex." Her father had his empty glass in his hand. I saw him set it down, look at the picture she was so like, put it in his hand to his forehead, and shrink back in his elbow chair. "I am unable, individual, to give you her health," proceeded Uriah, "but I adore her. No physical pain that her father's gray head could have borne, I think, could have been more terrible to me than the mental endurance I saw compressed now within his hands." "Agnes," said Uriah, either not regarding him or not knowing what the nature of his action was, "Agnes Wickfield is, I am safe to say, the divinest of her sex. May I speak out among friends? To be her father is a proud distinction, but to be her husband—" Spare me from ever hearing such a cry as that with which her father rose up from the table. "What's the matter?" said Uriah, turning of a deadly color. "You're not gone mad after all, Mr. Wickfield, I hope, if I say I've an ambition to make your Agnes my Agnes. I have as good a right to it as another man. I have a better right to it than any other man." So that's too much. Now Mr. Wickfield understands that Uriah wants to marry Agnes, and he's asking for permission from her father. But that's way too much for her father to handle, and he screams and stands up, and Uriah is saying, "What's wrong? Hey, I'm your partner. I'm your business partner. Do you think there's something wrong with me?" I had my arms round Mr. Wickfield, imploring him, that's begging, imploring him by everything that I could think of, oftenest of all by his love for Agnes, to calm himself a little. He was mad for the moment, tearing out his hair, beating his head, trying to force me from him, and to force himself from me, not answering a word, not looking at or seeing anyone, blindly striving for he knew not what, his face all staring and distorted, a frightful spectacle. I conjured him incoherently, but in the most impassioned manner, not to abandon himself to this wildness, but to hear me. I besought him to think of Agnes, to connect me with Agnes, to recollect how Agnes and I had grown up together, how I honored her and loved her, how she was his pride and joy. I tried to bring her idea before him in any form. I even... N is asking about conjure. I kind of thought that was weird, because to me, conjure means to make something appear. But I wonder if there's some other kind of meaning, because that doesn't seem to make sense here. Let's see, conjure. Maybe it's not conjure, but conjured. That's what I was thinking, but call upon, to make appear, implore to do something. Okay, if I look at the dictionary definition of the word conjure, in modern English, the way that you would use it means to make something appear. So if you see a magician can make something appear. The magician conjured a rabbit. That means by magic he made a rabbit appear suddenly. That's how you would use conjure in modern English. But there's another definition of conjure which is archaic. When you see that word archaic, that means people don't use it anymore. They used it in the past and now they don't use it. It could mean to implore, to beg. So it's another word for begging. So I begged him incoherently, but in the most impassioned manner, to abandon himself of this wildness. So in modern terms, that means I begged him to calm down. That's what it means. I even reproached him. I tried to bring her idea before him in any form. I even reproached him, not without having firmness to spare her the knowledge of such a scene as this. I may have effected something, or his wildness may have spent itself. But by degrees he struggled less, and began to look at me, strangely at first, and then with recognition in his eyes. At length he said, "I know, Trotwood, my darling child, and you, I know. But look at him." He pointed to Uriah, pale and glowering in the corner, evidently very much out of his calculations and taken by surprise. "Look at my torturer," he replied. "Before him I have step by step abandoned name and reputation, peace and quiet, house and home. I have kept your name and reputation for you, and your peace and your quiet and your house and your home too," said Uriah, with a sulky, hurried, defeated air of compromise. "Don't be foolish, Mr. Wickfield. I have gone a little beyond what you were prepared for. I can go back, I suppose. There's no harm done." "I looked for single motives in everyone," said Mr. Wickfield, "and I was satisfied I had bound him to me by motives of interest." Wait a minute. Let me read that again. That's kind of confusing. I looked for single motives in everyone. So he's saying I look for... When somebody wants something from me, I always try to understand what is their motivation. Why are they asking me this? Why are they doing this? Said Mr. Wickfield. And I was satisfied I had bound him to me by motives of interest. So when Uriah helped him with his business, we don't know what happened with Mr. Wickfield's business. We only know that he was in trouble, and somehow Uriah managed to save him from this trouble. And because of this value that he gave to Mr. Wickfield's business, he was promoted to partner in the business. And when this was happening, Mr. Wickfield is saying, I look for motives in what people do. So why is he doing this? And he had decided that the reason Uriah was helping him was because he wanted money. But I guess it wasn't. It was because he wanted Agnes. But see what he is. Oh, see what he is. You had better stop him, Copperfield, if you can, cried Uriah, with his long forefinger pointed towards me. He'll say something presently, mind you. He'll be sorry to have said afterwards, and you'll be sorry to have heard. So he's saying, stop him from talking, Davy, because if he keeps talking, he's going to say something and he will regret it. It will be very bad, and you will regret having heard it. I'll say anything, cried Mr. Wickfield with a desperate air. Why should I not be in all the world's power if I am in yours? Mind, I tell you, said Uriah, continuing to warn me, if you don't stop his mouth. You're not his friend. Why shouldn't you be in all the world's power, Mr. Wickfield? Because you have got a daughter. You and me know what we know, don't we? Let sleeping dogs lie. Who wants to rouse them? That's actually a very common phrase. To let sleeping dogs lie means don't disturb the sleeping dog. If you disturb the sleeping dog, it will get up and attack you or bite you. So that's a very common phrase to say, let sleeping dogs lie. That means don't cause trouble. Don't awaken some kind of trouble that's sleeping. Anna's asking about desperate air. I don't remember that. Let's see. Where was that? Well, I'm assuming you know the word desperate, so you're probably asking about what does that phrase "desperate air" mean? When you have the word air with some kind of feeling, a happy air, a desperate air, what other kind of airs are there? A sad air, a serious air. It means that whatever you're saying projects that feeling into the air, into the atmosphere. So you could say he said it desperately. So that means I could see that he was saying it desperately. But if you say he said it with a desperate air, that means when he said it, the whole atmosphere in the room was covered in desperation. It's kind of the same thing. But it's a little bit more poetic, I guess. I can't find it here. Oh, here it is. I'll say anything, cried Mr. Wickfield with a desperate air. So when he said that, the whole room filled with desperation. You could feel it everywhere. Mind, I tell you, said Uriah, continuing to warn me, if you don't stop his mouth, you're not his friend. Why shouldn't you be in all the world's power, Mr. Wickfield? Because you've got a daughter. You and me know what we know, don't we? Let sleeping dogs lie. He's saying don't make trouble. Don't start talking about things that are asleep that will awaken and cause great trouble. Let sleeping dogs lie. Who wants to rouse them? I don't. Can you see? I'm as humble as I can be. I tell you, if I've gone too far, I'm sorry. What would you have, sir? Oh, Trotwood, Trotwood, exclaimed Mr. Wickfield, wringing his hands. What have I come down to be since I first saw you in this house? I was on my downward way then, but the dreary, dreary road I have traversed since. Weak indulgence has ruined me, indulgence in remembrance and indulgence in forgetfulness. My natural grief for my child's mother turned to disease. My natural love for my child turned to disease. I have infected everything I touched. I have brought misery on what I dearly love. I know you know. I thought it possible I could truly love one creature in the world and not love the rest. I thought it possible I could truly mourn for one creature gone out of the world and not have some part in the grief of all who mourned. Thus the lessons of my life have been perverted. I have preyed on my own morbid coward heart, and it has preyed on me. Sordid in my grief, sordid in my love, sordid in my miserable escape from the darker side of both. Oh, see the ruin I am, and hate me, shun me. He dropped into a chair and weakly sobbed. The excitement into which he had been roused was leaving him. Uriah came out of his corner. I don't know all I have done in my fatuity. Fatuity? What's fatuity? Fatuity. Fatuity. Fatuity is stupidity or foolishness. N is asking, why is omitted in... wait, let me find it. First, let's answer sorted. Sorted could mean, I'm just checking the definition here, arousing moral distaste. So if you feel like something is wrong, morally wrong, that's disgusting, that's a sordid thing. We'll go back and look at how they used it in a minute, but let's find thought it possible. Where was that? I thought it possible that I could truly love one creature in the world and not love the rest. I thought it possible that I could truly mourn for one creature gone out of the world. There's a difference between... I've never thought about this. This is the first time I've ever really thought about this. But there's a difference between I think it is possible is... it's just like a declarative statement. Yeah, I think it's possible. But when you use, for example, I thought it possible, or I thought it a good idea, I think it's kind of a subjunctive mood where you're saying, well, I thought it would be this way, but it really didn't turn out to be that way. So if I say, N, do you think it's a good idea? I just want to know, you tell me your opinion. Is it a good idea or a bad idea? But if I say, N, do you think it a good idea? What I'm really saying is, I'm not sure if I'm going to do this, but if I did do it, would you think it's a good idea? I've never thought about that before. That's an interesting thing to think about. It's never come up before in an English class. That's interesting. That's a pretty advanced thing. So sorted means, I'm going to, maybe I'll do some kind of video about that. That's kind of a cool thing that I don't think there's probably very much information about. Sorted means like morally bad, something that offends you, or something disgusting, morally disgusting. So what was he saying? He used that word several times, didn't he? My sordid in my grief. So, Mr. Wickfield drinks a lot. He's a very nice man, but he drinks a lot of alcohol. So I think this is where he went wrong. He should have been grieving or feeling sad, but without the drinking. He should have confronted his problems without drinking. So that's the sordid part of his behavior. So that's why he was saying, let's see, I have preyed upon my own morbid coward heart, and it has preyed on me, sordid in my grief. So he was morally doing something bad in his grief, which is probably drinking. Sordid in my love. He has good love for his dead wife and his child, but it's been sordid by the alcohol. Sordid in my miserable escape from the darker side of both. Oh, see the ruin I'm in, and hate me, shun me. He dropped into a chair and weakly sobbed. The excitement into which he had been roused was leaving him, and Uriah came out of his corner. I don't know all I have done in my fatuity. And fatuity, what was that? I already forgot. I looked it up. Stupidness, foolishness, said Mr. Wickfield, putting out his hand as if to deprecate my condemnation. He knows best, meaning Uriah Heep, for he always been at my elbow whispering me. You see the millstone that he has about my neck? I find him in my house. I find him in my business. You heard him but a little time ago. What need have I to say more? You haven't need to say so much, nor half so much, nor anything at all, observed Uriah, half defiant and half fawning. You wouldn't have took it up so if it hadn't been for the wine. You'll think better of it tomorrow, sir, if I had said too much, or more than I meant. What of it? So they have a little secret, there's some little secret between those two that Mr. Wickfield can't talk about. If I had said too much, or more than I meant, what of it? I haven't stood by it. The door opened, and Agnes, gliding in without a vestige of color in her face, put her arm around his neck and steadily said, Papa, you're not well. Come with me. He laid his head upon her shoulder, as if he were oppressed with heavy shame, and went out with her. Her eyes met mine, but for an instant, yet I saw how much she knew of what had passed. So Agnes isn't stupid. She knows what's happening. I didn't expect he'd cut up so rough, Master Copperfield, said Uriah, but it's nothing. I'll be friends with him tomorrow. It's for his good. I'm humbly anxious for his good. I gave no answer, and went upstairs into the quiet room where Agnes had so often sat beside me at my books. Nobody came near me until at night. I took up a book and tried to read. I heard the clock strike 12, and was still reading, without knowing what I read, when Agnes touched me. Anne is saying, will you read this book at this time? I love this book, but precious love cannot attend. It's early for me. And I normally read this book in about, I don't know where you are. I don't know where you're located, but I usually read it at night, which is about 10 hours from now. But I'm just finishing The Great Gatsby in the morning. And I don't have enough time this morning to finish it, so I'm going to read the rest of the book tomorrow morning. And so I just decided, since I have a little time this morning, I'll read a chapter from this book, which is very long. But normally I read this in the evening, which is about 10 hours from now. So if you're interested and you're available in 10 hours, then you might want to watch the rest of it. I gave him no answer and went upstairs into the quiet room where Agnes had so often sat beside me at my books. Nobody came near me until late at night. I took up a book and tried to read. I heard the clocks strike 12 and was still reading without knowing what I read when Agnes touched me. You will be going early in the morning, Trotwood. Let us say goodbye now. She had been weeping. Weeping is crying. But her face was then so calm and beautiful. Heaven bless you, she said, giving me her hand. Dearest Agnes, I returned. I see you ask me not to speak of tonight, but is there nothing to be done? There is God to trust in, she replied. Can I do nothing? I, who come to you with my poor sorrows, and make mine so much lighter, she replied. Dear Trotwood, no. Okay, well, so you're in Georgia. Oh, I see what you're saying. Actually, right now is a good time for you. And the evening time, because in Georgia, that would be like, I don't know, that's like 9 or 10 hours from now. So that would be right now, I guess it's probably around 6 p.m. for you, or 7 p.m. or something like that. And so that would be early in the morning for you, I guess. Oh, I'm sorry. Dear Agnes, I said, it is presumptuous for me, who am so poor in all which you are so rich, goodness, resolution, all noble qualities, to doubt or direct you, but you know how much I love you and how much I owe you. You will never sacrifice yourself to a mistaken sense of duty, Agnes." More agitated for a moment than I had ever seen her, she took her hands from mine and moved a step back. "Say you have no such thought, dear Agnes. Much more than sister, think of the priceless gift of such a heart as yours, of such love as yours." Oh, long, long afterwards I saw the face rise up before me with its momentary look, not wondering, not accusing, not regretting. Oh, long, long afterwards I saw that look subside as it did now, into the lovely smile with which she told me she had no fear for herself. I need have done for her, and parted from me by the name of brother, and was gone. Copperfield. It was dark in the morning when I got up, and the coach at the inn door. The day was just breaking when we were about to start, and then, as I sat thinking of her, came struggling up the coach side through the mingled day and night Uriah's head. "Copperfield," said he, in a croaking whisper, as he hung by the iron on the roof, "I thought you'd be glad to hear before you went off that there are no squares broke between us. I've been into his room already, and we've made it all smooth. Why, though I'm humble, I'm useful to him, you know, and he understands his interest when he isn't in liquor. What an agreeable man he is, after all, Master Copperfield. And is asking about mingle. Mingle is like mix. And so a lot of times you use that, like imagine if somebody goes to a party and they sit somewhere and they don't talk to anyone. You say, "What's wrong with you? Go mingle." And that means go and talk to people, mix with other people. How did they use mingle here? I don't even remember that word. Okay, let's see. The day was just breaking when we were about to start, and then I sat thinking of her, came struggling up to the coach side through the mingled day and night. So this was the time when the sun was coming up, so the day and the night were mingling. They were kind of mixed at this period. This was the dawn, the twilight, what is the other word? The sunrise. And is asking about umble. Certain people in the UK, when they speak, they do not pronounce the letter H at the beginning of a word. That's a very common characteristic of certain accents in the UK. So he is pronouncing the word humble, but he always pronounces it umble. I obliged myself to say that I was glad that he had made his apology. "Oh, to be sure," said Uriah. "When a person's humble, you know, what's an apology? So easy, I say, I suppose," with a jerk. "You have sometimes plucked a pear before it was ripe, Master Copperfield." "I suppose I have." "I did that last night," said Uriah, "but it'll ripen yet. It only wants attending to. I can't wait." Profuse in his farewells, he got down again as the coachman got up. For anything I know, he was eating something to keep the raw morning air out. But he made motions with his hands as if the pear were ripe already, and he was smacking his lips over it. Okay, so smack your lips. Smack! It's this motion, but also the focus is on that sound. So if you're smacking your lips, that's because of the sound, not because of the motion, but the sound is a similar sound. So if somebody is eating like this, which is disgusting, then you say, "Don't smack your lips. Stop smacking your lips. That's disgusting." All right, well, that was the end of chapter 39 of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. So next time, tonight, actually, we will be reading chapter 40 of Charles Dickens, David Copperfield, The Wanderer. Well, thank you everybody who stayed and watched, and thank you for all of your questions and comments, and I hope you watch again really soon, and I'll see you later. Goodbye.